So what's happened in the last 50 years or so is that the relationship between information and attention has sort of gotten reversed. For most of human history, our attention was, we had practically infinite amounts of attention and very little information. And around 50 years ago, that began to say before the internet became a major factor at all, that situation began to be reversed. And Herbert Simon, who's was a Nobel laureate, economist, computer scientist, and so forth, sort of predicted this in a really important speech that he gave in I think 1969 or 70. And this this idea of the reversal between information and attention is something that is really key to everything that's happened, or many things that have happened at least in the last few decades. Richard Lanham, who wrote this book, The Economics of Attention, he talks about he makes the distinction between, as he calls it, stuff and fluff. It used to be stuff that was important, like physical things. Now it's fluff, which is to say the attention that we give to things. It's the subtitle of this book is Style and Substance in the Age of Information. And what he's saying is that substance is less and less and less important, and that style becomes more and more important. And one of the great things that he writes about is the idea of an attention structure, which is to say something that's built, and it could be a physical object or it could be something else entirely, but something that's built solely to call attention to itself. And we are constantly, I think, at this point, surrounded by attention structures. And this idea of understanding what they are and why they exist and why they have such power over us is, I think, really critical. So here's another book, Actual Minds, Possible Worlds by Jerome Bruner. Bruner was a cognitive psychologist who was one of the key people in the cognitive revolution against behaviorism in the 1950s and 60s. He was, therefore one of the founders of what's become known as cognitive science. In the early 80s, he started to get frustrated with cognitive science as it was happening then, because it wasn't focusing on stories. He began to think that stories were how we construct reality, the stories we tell ourselves, the stories we tell each other, that's how we construct the reality that we live in. The world that we live in is a construct. That's a key idea of his, and that stories are the means of construction. And in this book, he says, there are two modes of thought. The first mode is what up to that point people had been trained to focus on, to think was critical to the idea of being human, which is to say logic, the data, facts, and then there's stories, which is to say an appeal to the emotions. And so this idea that there were two modes of consciousness and that they were each one was as important as the other was really considered radical at the time. And since then, of course, the situation has changed completely. Now, I think pretty much everybody understands how important stories are People don't necessarily understand how they work and how to, make use of them, which is what I focus on at the Columbia program that I lead. But anyway, Jerome Bruner, great. This book is actually 20 years old, more than 20 years old, 22, I think. The Experience Economy by Joseph Pine and James Gilmore. The idea here is that everybody's familiar with the idea that we've moved from a manufacturing economy to a service economy. That happened decades ago. And what they say in this book, and it's an idea that has gained more and more currency as it's become increasingly obvious in the last 2 decades or so, is that we're now moved from a service economy to an experience economy, where what's important, what adds value, is the experience that you can create for your customers, for your fans, whoever. This is obvious in entertainment, but it happens everywhere. Airbnb, Starbucks, the idea that you would pay, $5 or $6 or $7 for a cup of coffee because it's a special cup of coffee that's made for you, on the spot by a barista and now of course, other companies have taken it far beyond Starbucks. You go to Phil's in San Francisco and they make your coffee, even if it's just like a regular cup of coffee, they make it for you individually and, more and more, everything is an experience. And the truth is, everything has always been an experience, but it depends on what you focus on and where you find the added value. And, sometimes, as at Starbucks, the experience is sort of an add-on to the product. Other times, if you go to Disneyland, for example, the experience is the product. But either way, it's a recognition that, all the world's a stage and we're all actors in it. So this book, On the Origin of Stories, Brian Boyd, this was a book that I discovered when I was writing The Art of Immersion back in 2009, 2010. Brian Boyd is a literary figure. He's the sort of the world's foremost authority on Nabokov. He's written a 2-volume biography of Nabokov, and then he's followed that by books about each of Nabokov's major novels. And he's a professor of English at the University of Auckland in New Zealand. And what he does here On the Origin of Stories is basically a Darwinist approach to literature. Like, why do we tell each other stories? And why do we, in particular, tell each other fictional stories? Stories that we know aren't true, that we, like both sides know, the storyteller and the audience knows that they're not true. And, he's, as you can tell, he goes into this in some depth, but I think the essential answer is that we tell each other stories to convey, basically our sense of reality, and we immerse ourselves in these stories because that's how we learn. If you have small children, they want to hear the same story over and over and over again. If you're reading to them, if they're watching TV, if they're, whatever. Kids in particular want to hear the same story over and over again because they are, that's how they, they're not thinking in these terms, but that's how they learn. Stories at this level are about socialization, right? They're about, teaching us how do we respond in this situation or that situation. Boyd, just sort of brings this to life in a thousand different ways and quite brilliantly. And finally, I wanted to mention this, The Age of Surveillance Capitalism by Shoshana Zuboff. I reviewed this book for the Wall Street Journal, and in some ways I was kind of frustrated by it because, I feel that it goes on, and it should be more succinct. But nonetheless, her argument is brilliant and super important. This idea that we have allowed ourselves to be surveilled, by companies like Google, Amazon, Facebook, that they are, these have become, among the world's most valuable companies in terms of market capitalization, specifically because they, they report on us, they report on what we're doing, and the really important part, which most people miss, is they're then able to predict what we're going to do in the future. And, I have very smart friends who say, but, what does it matter? They don't care about me in particular. But that's not true. They do care about you in particular because it's you they want to sell to. Or more to the point, it's you that they want to enable their advertisers to sell to. Now, frankly, I think that most of this is an illusion. The idea that you are going to buy something because it's been following you around the internet for 6 weeks is, you're more likely to just want to never see it again. But nonetheless, merchants, people who sell things, are very good at grasping at straws. And I think this illusion of, that you can predict the future of your potential audience, you can predict what they're going to want to buy, is very, very powerful. And so it's, sort of catnip for advertisers, even when it's not true. And it's something that we have, we as audiences have allowed to happen without even thinking about it. And what's important about this book is that Shoshana Zuboff, in The Age of Surveillance Capitalism, lays it all out, lays out how it works, lays out, the whole thing, and basically the devil's bargain that we're making in order to essentially make the people who are advertising to us feel like they have control of something.